Hello and welcome to episode 14 of What's Tom Reading. I'm Tom, and today I'm talking about the international best-selling sensation that gripped the hearts and minds of teenage girls everywhere. That's right, I'm talking about Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. This one comes as a request by a couple of you guys, and I have a lot to say, so stay tuned and enjoy the show. All right, so as I said, today I am talking about the Titanic mega hit novel Twilight. And this has to have been one of the most popular, if not most popular book for teen girls in the history of the world. And by way of disclaimer right off the bat, this is not normally the type of book that I would be super into, if I'm completely honest with you. In fact, I've actually tried to read this book a couple of times just to see what the deal with it is, and I couldn't swallow the cringe long enough to get into it. If I'm 100% honest here, some of you guys suggested that I actually decide or get into this, and so I decided to finally finish the book and feature it on the show. So I have you guys to thank for giving me the motivation to finally fully partake in this piece of our popular culture. I had missed out on it for a lot of years, and I feel like I kind of missed the boat because this book has been out for 16 years now. And, well, yeah, it came out in 2005. I think I did the math on that right. I'm studying for a finance exam right now, and I'm actually taking a break to record this episode, and I'm short circuiting whenever I try to do even basic math now. That's I've dedicated all of my meager math points to being able to pass this exam. So you'll have to excuse my mental arithmetic. It's poor at the best of times and non-existent at this time. So, but basically, what I was trying to say is that I missed the boat on this book the first time around. And I feel bad for that because I did try to read it back when it was super popular, and I was just like, no, that's not my thing at all. So I put it down and I didn't pick it up, and I tried to pick it up a couple of times throughout the years because I thought, man, I really missed out on this. Even if I don't love a book, if it's an important book, I still want to read it. I still want to have read it and be able to participate in that part of humanity. It's a huge thing. Like I said, one of the biggest, best is a point of quality rather than popularity, but it's one of the biggest, most famous YA novels, young adult novels ever written. And so, and I have to say here that both my wife and my little sister were huge fans of this book when they were teens. And I think they might actually secretly have a soft spot for it, to be honest. They both read the book over and over again and loved it every time. And they are two of the people that I respect most in this world. So I figured I'd better give this book a good faith effort to enjoy and see what all the fuss has been about. As I'm sure most of you can probably already sense, this is not one of my all-time favorites. In fact, there were times where I had to outright shut it off and listen to something else because the dialogue basically clogged my ears. That said, I don't want to just do a slam Twilight episode of the show. That's been done and done again, and I'm not interested in rehashing memes from, 15 years ago. The fact is, and I don't like it, and maybe you don't like it, maybe you do like it, but this is one of the greatest young adult franchises in the history of humankind. It must have done something right in order to be that popular. And so it's with that in mind that I sat down with this book and tried to give it my best good faith efforts to understand. And that's what I'm going to try to execute with this episode. How successful I'll be, I don't know, but here we go. So, this book was published in 2005 by author Stephenie Meyer, who has gone on to write many, many successful novels that all have the same premise, plot, and characters as this one. Kind of a one-trick pony, maybe. And that's fine, right? Because, J.K. Rowling, right? She wrote Harry Potter, which actually, Harry Potter is probably the biggest young adult novel series in history. Twilight, I think, is behind that. Definitely Harry Potter's bigger, actually. And J.K. Rowling hasn't written anything else of quality. My wife is a huge Harry Potter fan as well, and she read Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling and said that it was just the bleakest, worst book. None of the magic of Harry Potter, obviously. because I think she was trying to do a gritty reboot or something. I don't know what she was trying to do, but anyways, Stephenie Meyer, I think she's written a couple of other things. I have not heard of them. Twilight is kind of the big thing for her career. I'm not actually sure what she's up to these days. I'll be honest, I didn't look. I'm saving all of the available cares that I have about this book for the book itself, and I didn't have that much left for the author. And once I get to the section where I talk about the things that I didn't like, I actually have I have some beef with Stephenie Meyer as a person for some of the portrayals that she has in this book, but we'll save that for the back end. Okay. So I wasn't super interested in researching her. I listened to a couple of interviews that she did just to try and figure out what she was thinking with the sparkliness of the vampires. And it was just a dream that she had. And so she was like, oh, well, they have to be sparkly now. So I'm going to leave the author and we're going to move on to the book. But before I go even an inch further on this show, I'm going to say, spoiler alert, with nonfiction books, I can skirt around and pick and mix a little bit about the book and give you guys like a bit of a picture without spoiling the whole thing for you. But that is extremely difficult to do with a fiction novel. So if you haven't read Twilight or seen the movies and you don't want to be spoiled, then maybe come back to this episode later. If you have seen the movies, actually, that's one of the things that I have to say I like about this franchise. The movies, I thought, were actually a fairly faithful adaptation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So for those of you who are familiar with the Twilight universe, or for those of you who will never, under any circumstances, read this book, let's go ahead and press forward, having been given your spoiler alert. So let's start with the main character, Bella Swan. And I have to say that first simplest fact about this story kind of makes my stomach turn a little bit. Her name is Bella Swan. Bella as in, beautiful. That's what that name means. And Swan as in she's a beautiful swan, as in, I mean, it's kind of on the nose. It's kind of on the nose. And Cullen, I'm not sure if the author intended this. In fact, I'm quite sure that she didn't. But when you cull something, that's killing or thinning, like the herd, like culling chickens or something like that. You're killing them. So Cullen, kind of funny too. But anyways, Bella, we're talking about her right now. She has, as my little sister says, she's got mad, I'm not like the other girls vibes. And she's so superior and so condescending towards her classmates. And the book is written in first person. And so we have this internal dialogue of her just being the cringiest teenager you can possibly imagine. She moves. So she lives with her mom in Phoenix at the start of the book, and she moves up to Forks, Washington in like the second sentence of the book to live with her dad because her mom is going off with her boyfriend or new husband. I can't remember. Phil, I think is his name. And he's a minor league baseball player looking to get signed. And so he moves to Florida, and Bella decides that she'll just leave her mom so that her mom can enjoy her life with Phil. And so she's going to go live with her dad, who she extremely cringily calls Charlie. So she calls her dad by his first name. That's another good way that you can tell that this person is cringe. She goes to live in Forks, Washington. It's super rainy, and she's like, it's a small town, and she has super superior vibes over all of everything about this town. She's like, ugh, everyone here is so stupid and basic. And everyone here, all of the classes, I already learned this because I'm so smart. She's basically the most superior person from Phoenix that you've ever imagined. And like, don't get me wrong. I've spent time in Phoenix. I like Phoenix enough. During the summertime, it is not actually habitable by human beings. And so for me to see Bella as a character who's like, oh, Phoenix is so much cooler and better. I've actually never heard a person from Phoenix brag about being from Phoenix before. And I know, like I said, I'm around people from Arizona all the time. And they're like, yeah, I like Arizona, but they're not like, ugh, could you imagine not living in Arizona? Ew. Right. Like, but Bella has this huge, this huge superiority vibe because she's from Phoenix, and all these small town yokels couldn't possibly understand her depth. And maybe this is a good time for me to say that the movie adaptation was actually pretty true to the books. And the reason I wanted to throw this in right now is because I think that Kristen Stewart, or Kirsten Stewart? anyways, the girl who plays Bella on the movies, I think that she is, quite frankly, and Miss Stewart, if you're listening right now, I'm so sorry, but you are a talentless toe of an actress, and you emote very, very poorly. And the Bella in the books, I think, was actually much better, so long as you work hard to absolutely not picture her like Kristen Stewart as Bella. Like, it's got to be a different Bella, one that is like visible facial emotions and, chemistry with the people that she interacts with, right? It's also, I think, better if you picture like Batman Robert Pattinson as Edward instead of like the anemic, scrawny cringeling that he was portrayed as in the Twilight movies. Whoever was doing the makeup on that set, I have to say, like, you could have made them pale without making them look sick. Right. Because Robert Pattinson looks disgusting in these movies, and he's a handsome dude. Like, I like me some Robert Pattinson. He's also a talented actor, and I'm surprised that the Twilight movies I'm frankly surprised that they didn't destroy his career, to be honest, like, because that sucked. But the movies follow along the plot, such as it is, of the books very, very well. And so we jump back into the book, into the story, and Bella, she's just super smart in that she's basically Stephenie Meyer's best attempt at portraying a smart girl. So she talks about how she's like rereading Wuthering Heights and Shakespeare, but she doesn't actually reference any of the material from the books. Which is funny because, she's like, oh, I'm super into Shakespeare and I'm super into Wuthering Heights, but then like no passages, no information from those. Did Stephenie Meyer, have you read those? Have you read Wuthering Heights? Have you read any Shakespeare before? Because you could have put some in. And in fairness, she might have included a few passages originally, but then the editor likely took them out. After all, putting a diamond in a turd does not elevate the turd. It simply mocks the diamond. That's a wise saying that I came up with all on my own just now, but it sounded wise, and so I decided to just say it. Anyway, I think we have all probably known a Bella at some point in our lives before. Someone who just goes around being more or less a generic NPC, but they think that their inner thoughts are so deep that nobody else could possibly comprehend them. Just like I said before, Bella has mad, I'm not like the other girls vibes. Okay, I have to stop here. No, I for real have to stop here and focus on the good. And I'll say what I didn't like for the back half of the show. As is customary, this is not fair for me to be doing this because actually this, as I said before, this book must have done something right. It was insanely popular. So here's what I liked and what I think made it so popular. First of all, it's different, or at least it was different at the time, right? Vampires kind of got overplayed. Zombies kind of got overplayed. But at the time, this was an interesting kind of topical take on vampires that was unique. And vampires are not historically considered to be like what you would call proper love interests in a story. Certainly vampires have like seduced people in the lore before. But this take on vampires where they're a love interest is very, very unique, and it's different. Also that they are, quote unquote, vegetarian vampires. That's very interesting as well, because vampires drink blood, but I had actually never heard a lore of vampires drinking animal blood before instead of human blood. And so, where the Cullens drink deer blood or cougar blood or grizzly bear blood or whatever blood they can get their hands on, that's kind of a unique take on vampires that, falls more in line with like a chupacabra or something like that. But vampires, at least in every other thing that I've read, vampires hunt humans. And certainly these vampires are equipped to do that. They are super strong, super fast. They smell really nice. They sparkle in the sun, which, I didn't like. Okay, I'll save that for the back end too. I didn't love the sparkling in the sun, but I did really like the introduction of Edward's basic powers, right? His mind reading powers, I thought were really, really a cool plot device. And in the I almost said something negative again there, but it's a really cool plot device that moved the story along in very interesting ways. And that's worth saying. That's worth praising. Also, I liked the setting, and I think one thing that Stephenie Meyer did that I can kind of tip my cap to her a little bit and say, you know what, like, you actually nailed this. I think she actually does a setting very well. So her dialogue is not my favorite. Her characters are not at all my favorite. In fact, I question whether there are characters in this. But her setting, her ability to paint a picture of the surroundings is actually very impressive. And I really did feel like throughout my reading of this book, I always knew where I was in space. I always knew what was around me. I always kind of had a sense of the smells and sounds and the textures and the temperature and all that stuff. So I feel like this book really executed on setting very well. And I think that might be one of the things that contributed to its massive success and popularity, is that people were able to kind of slide their own personalities in over the one-dimensional characters. You know, maybe the young ladies who were reading it, they would picture themselves as Bella, and the boy that they were crushing on as Edward. And that was easy to do because the characters, basically, you can just sweep them aside because it doesn't actually matter what they say or do, except for Edward has, you know, some serious red flags that we'll get to later on. But basically, you know, I feel like being able to slot your own personality into the story works well because the setting is so rich and you know where you are when you're there. And so I think that added to the immersion, maybe for the young female fans and, you know, young male fans as well. But everyone I know who really, really enjoyed this book was a young lady when it came out. So I liked the Cullen family vibe there. I liked the idea of like a coven of vampires kind of choosing to live together for company, and because they like each other, you know, over the eons of their lives, and, you know, protecting each other. I really enjoyed that. I liked Charlie as a character, and I felt extreme cringe and also shame at the way that Bella treated him and spoke about him internally and to her friends throughout the series, or throughout the first book especially. You know, Charlie gets short shrift for being a good guy. He's a police chief. Everybody likes him, except for Bella calls him Charlie and lies to him and thinks that he's dumb. And, you know, it's kind of lame that way. But Charlie was a good character. I actually like Bella's friends. I think that those are the most realistic characters in the book, and that they're like, you know, they're pretty nice to Bella when she first moves. It's kind of annoying that, like, so there's this guy, Mike, he helps Bella find her classes on the first day. And she's like, I picture him as a dog wagging his tail, right? Like she's just awful to the people around her. Or when she first meets Jacob, he's like, hi, Bella, my name is Jacob and I like you. And she's like, I ask him about his family. I'm using him. Like, okay, that was weird. There was a weird way to think of that interaction, because on the surface, it's like a really pleasant exchange. And then in her internal dialogue is like, I feel some small guilt at the fact that I'm using him. So anyways, there were characters that I liked, just not the main characters, and the setting I really enjoyed. And so, oh man, I actually think I might be out of things that I liked about this book. And I feel bad because, like, I did give it, hand on my heart, I gave it my best shot to really get into it, to really like it, to see what all the fuss was about. And I have to say that the main draw that I can see, the main appeal that I can see from the outside looking in, is that the characters are one-dimensional enough that you can kind of slot your own personality on top of theirs and live in this vibrant setting that Stephenie Meyer has created for you to live in, enacting this kind of gung-ho plot that is interesting at points and then is, you know, inconsistent in other points, but it doesn't really matter, right? Because you're in it and you feel like you're in it, and there's big emotions in there. And so maybe that's why it was so popular. And I have to say that's basically it. So let's we'll take a breather, we'll move over to the corners, and then we'll move on with the rest of what I didn't like so much. So let's head on over to the science corner. All right, welcome to the Science Corner, and today we are talking about vampires. So I thought, why not talk about vampire bats? So did a little research on vampire bats, and they're gross. They're gross animals, basically, so they can fly, and they do fly like regular bats. But when they approach their prey animals, they decide to land for some reason, and I'm not really sure what the reason is, since those prey animals could stomp on them. But basically, they land and then they walk towards their prey, and they're the only bat species that we know of that can run, and they gallop across the ground with their little pig faces, pig demon faces, and then they climb up onto an animal. They wait basically until the animal forgets that they're there. And then they have these heat sensors in their ugly pig snout, and they find where the blood is running closest to the surface of the skin. Then they use their extremely sharp front teeth, which what I read said that they were the sharpest teeth in the animal kingdom, which is really cool. And they basically cut away the hair or fur right there above the skin and make a tiny, tiny incision. And then they spit into the wound this anticoagulant that helps the blood to keep flowing. And they just will sit there for 30 minutes and lick it up and lap up the blood. Yummy, yummy, delicious, gooey blood, I guess, for the vampire bats. And then when they're done, they'll fly off. And they kind of seem to be able to remember where the animal is. So like if it's a horse and it's in a stable, the same vampire bat will fly back to it, night after night and just drink its blood. They only drink about a tablespoon a night, but they are in large numbers causing serious problems for livestock, especially since they are a vector for the virus rabies, which sucks because they kill lots of animals, and they also have been killing like lots of people in South and Central America for lots of years. And we don't actually know what way that vampire bats contribute to the ecosystem. In fact, there's no known contribution that they have to the ecosystem. They're basically a parasite species. So the Panamanian government is trying to eradicate them right now. And there are a lot of people who are like, no, they're cute. Save them. Oh, man, they could be useful. Anyways, we found out what was in their spit, their anticoagulant in their spit. We got it. We synthesized our own version of it. And I think that's good. I think we can just chalk up the rest of the vampire bat species to we got what we came for. And let's send them back to the pits of hell where they spawned from, right? That's my opinion. This has been the Science Corner. We're moving over to the History Corner. All right, welcome to the History Corner. So way back when, in the I Am Legend episode, feels like forever ago now, I talked about Vlad the Impaler and how he was likely inspirational for like what we think of as a vampire, like a stereotypical vampire in folklore. Here, I wanted to talk about another character who may have been part of the inspiration for what we think of as the modern vampire. This is a woman who is called the Countess of Blood or other different nicknames that are cool, but her real name was Elizabeth Bathory. And I'm not sure that I pronounced that right because she was Hungarian and my Hungarian is not so good. But basically, this woman was accused of having a number of her servants round up many young girls, bring them to her, castle / mansion kind of thing. And she would have them tortured and killed, and she would drink their blood and she would bathe in their blood. The idea was that she was using, virgin blood, bathing in it in order to stay young. And this is not actually, turns out I did some research on this. And the hard facts of this is that bathing in virgin blood is not a recommended anti-aging beauty routine. So, don't do that. But basically, Elizabeth Bathory, Ms. Bathory, was convicted. She was tried and convicted of basically they had 300 people testifying. They had found grisly remains and young girls in various states of torture and death when they raided her compound, and they suspect that she was responsible for the death of hundreds of young girls over the course of a 20-year period, along with the help of 4 of her servants. And they were put on trial. The 4 servants, because they lacked her titles, they were all sentenced to death, and that was carried out swiftly. Ms. Bathory herself was condemned to live the rest of her life in isolation, and she did, without the virgin blood to keep her young. It turned out that she aged and then died in confinement. Although many years later, there are some people who say that this was actually most likely a witch hunt, that there were rival political houses that were trying to get the Bathory house out of the way. That's probably more likely what happened, but I mean, the Countess of Blood is a really cool name. This has been the History Corner. Let's move over to the Random Corner. Hello, and welcome to the Random Corner. It is with great sorrow that I must report some bad news for today's Random Corner. Lily, the water bug, has passed away. She's no longer with us. After living with us for some time, eating a bunch of goldfish and a bunch of crickets, she finally curled her little demon arms underneath her carapace and died. My daughters were devastated for almost 15 minutes. I was glad to not have to have Lily's beady, evil eyes staring at me while I record my podcasts, but now that I look down and to the left and I no longer see her there plotting my demise, I have to say, Lily was an okay, evil water bug. Let's move back to the main review. Rest in peace, Lily. You will not be missed for long, but watching you inject goldfish with your venom and then suck their putrefied organs out through your rostrum was disgusting, and I don't have that much good to say about you. Let's go back to the main review. All right, welcome back to the main review. And as you know, on the back half of the show, I get to talk about the things that I didn't like about the book. And I saved myself some time because there is quite a lot about this book that I did not love. And I don't want, for those of you who are fans of this book, I don't want to turn you off here. I don't want to have you feel like I'm attacking, this book that you like. I don't want to yuck your yum, so to speak, right? But at the same time, there were some serious problems with this book that I feel like I, in good conscience, as a reviewer of books, this is what this show is for, people. So I'm going to tell the truth about Twilight. First off, the writing is atrocious. I wrote down, so just so you guys know, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain here on how I do these shows. So largely now I'm listening to audiobooks. I still love to read, standard paper books, but I don't have as much time to do that as I used to. Just the way that my life is, I'm busy, you're busy, lots of people are busy, but basically I don't have as much time to sit around and read the old fashioned way as I would like to, even though I would prefer to read that way. So I spend a lot of my time now reading audiobooks. And I do that during my walking commute. I have about a half an hour walking commute to school and a half an hour back. I listen to the books at 2.2 times speed on Audible, which is a very nice feature that they have. It allows me to consume books at quite a rapid pace, and that's about my standard reading pace if I'm visually reading it. So that feels good and comfortable to me. I've heard a lot of people say that pace is really, really uncomfortable for them, and it kind of ruins the experience for them. I got used to it really fast, and it has allowed me to read quickly. And I'm able to knock down, that's my 1 hour commute, there and back again. That's 2.5 hours or so of reading every day that I get to fit into my schedule for not 2.5 hours of time. So it's a good fit for me. Basically, though, in order for me to do this podcast while I'm reading, I carry around a little dictation device for me, a little tape recorder that when I hear something or when I think of something that's interesting that I want to include in the podcast, I'll pull out I'll pause the book, pull out the dictation device, just say my thoughts into the dictation device, and then that's it. Then I'll move on, start the book again, and then when I'm ready to record an episode, I'll bring my dictation device out and I'll play the recordings that I made for that book. And that's a good way for me to organize my thoughts while I'm out and on the move. So while I was reading this book, there were like within the first couple, like I want to say like the first chapter, if I'm honest, there were so many things that I started to like record that eventually I was like, you know what, I'm just going to end up never finishing this book if I have to stop and record everything that's annoying to me. So like, let me just read you a line. Right. And the context of this line is that Edward isn't going to be at school tomorrow. He tells her he's not going to be at school tomorrow. And the author for real wrote, "The desolation hit me with unfathomable force." And I just thought, wow, that might be the worst line I have ever read in literature. The desolation hit me with unfathomable force. And, you know, there's just lots of little nuggets throughout there that you're like, why'd you say it like that? Where I'm just like, I'm going throughout my business. I'm in the story. And then all of a sudden I just cringe because the desolation hit me with unfathomable force. Right. And, as I mentioned before in the first part, the characters are just bad. They're bad, right? Like I said, I think the idea with Bella is that she's supposed to be easy for every girl to print their own personality over hers. But if I'm truly honest here, I don't actually think that's what Stephenie Meyer had in mind when she wrote Bella. I think she thought she was a cool character. And let's not even talk about Edward, who is actually, no, let's talk about Edward, right? Because he is just a dirty old man in the worst way. There is no excuse for his behavior. And as I said before, this is where I kind of have some problems with Stephenie Meyer, right? Because the fact that she endorses and glamorizes and makes this big plot thing, the fact that Edward is 100 years older than Bella is, you know, give or take, that's a problem. Right. And I think the idea is like, oh, it's so many years older that it's not like he's a creepy old man. Right. If he was 20 years older, like, you know, like if he was, you know, 37 or 47 years old and going after a 17-year-old high schooler. Yeah, that'd be gross. But because he's 117, that's different. That's different. Right. I don't think it's different. I think it's problematic. And I have beef with the author for making that like kind of glamorizing that. Right. Normalizing it. I'll come back to that. There's a couple of plot things that bug me, right? So vampires are these stealthy apex predators. Their senses and superpowers are like just undeniable. They can smell, they can hear, they can leap, they can lunge, they can rip people limb from limb with their bare hands. They're like this live among you apex predator, right? And they blend in with their prey. And oh no, they don't. They sparkle in the sunlight for some reason. Why do they sparkle? Please. Why do they sparkle? Do lions sparkle? Do alligators sparkle? Do eagles sparkle? What possible predatory advantage does sparkling give to an apex predator? Well, there are many fan theories that try to retcon this abomination. They say, oh, it's a glamour. He's glamorizing. He's, you know, it's the way that vampires, you know, their sparkliness seduces their prey. It wouldn't. It would just identify them as vampires, and then people would have driven them to extinction a long time ago. The sparkliness is actually, I think, the biggest weakness of the vampires in Stephenie Meyer's series, and it's dumb. It's a dumb weakness, right? It would have been actually a lot cooler if they couldn't go out in the sunlight, if they got burned like regular vampires. I mean, I say regular vampires, like regular fictional character vampires do in most other fictional adaptations. But I think, and I know actually because I watched a video of her doing an interview, Stephenie Meyer, she had a dream where she was in a meadow with a sexy vampire and the vampire was sparkly. And that's why the vampires have to be sparkly. She wrote Twilight basically off of that whole meadow scene. That meadow scene, by the way, is an abomination. And actually, okay, let me get through my list here, then we'll come back to the meadow scene and Edward's red flags. Okay. So the other thing that bothered me is that Bella, she's like this most irresistible, incredible, interesting woman on the planet. She's from Phoenix, you guys. Did you hear the new girl? She's from Phoenix. I've never known someone from Phoenix. Oh, Phoenix. Wow, how exotic. And again, no offense to anyone who's from Phoenix, right? Like, I love all my Arizonian friends, but like Phoenix, right? It's not like she's from Paris or London or even like New York or Los Angeles, right? She's from Phoenix, right? Big deal. Lots of people are from lots of places. Phoenix is just a place. But like all of these boys and girls in Forks, Washington are like literally crapping their pants over the fact that Bella is this super cool, super interesting girl from Phoenix. And that just bugs me the entire time, right? And she's so much smarter than all of the boys, so much smarter than all of the girls. They're all just trash. They're all just dumb. Her friend, she's like, oh, they're just like, every piece of dialogue describes her friends as chittering or chattering or yammering. And I'm like, that's offensive and rude. That's a really rude way to think about people. Bella is a jerk. And all the boys, they're super interested in her. And so she just like walks around feeling so superior and so mature. Oh, I already learned all of this. I'm doing Shakespeare. And she says one time, she's like, I'm writing my paper on the misogynistic portrayal of women by Shakespeare. And then another boy looks at her like she's a chode because that's a jerk thing to say. Right? Oh, like, okay, whatever, right? Misogynistic treatment of women by Shakespeare. Sure. Write a paper about it, right? But like, she treats, like, Mike responds like by kind of cringing a little bit. And she's like, it's obvious from his dumb dog face that he doesn't understand. Right. It's pretty cringe. So anyways, she goes around feeling super superior. And that's why I guess she feels like she's mature enough to be groomed by an old man with a shiny car. So mature. Let's go back to the red flags with Edward. And this is the big problem I had with the book. So he stalks her. He follows her around. He listens in on her conversations, basically records her against her knowledge, right? Without her knowing. He's listening to the minds of her friends, and he's able to hear her and see her and smell her and just be gross with her everywhere she goes. He follows her around town, breaks into her room at night, watches her sleep. He pushes her around physically a lot. And that's so like, I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I have 4 daughters and a wife. So I live with 5 women, and every time I think, or throughout this book, every time I heard or read that Edward was shoving Bella around, I was like, ooh, I was like, boy, you don't try that with any of my daughters. Okay. At one point he pushes her against the door of his car, tells her to get in, and then drives her away against her will to a place that she knows not, right? He's abusive, manipulative, and he actively scares her a whole bunch of times. And I'm like, as I'm reading this, I'm getting mad Van Helsing impulses right now. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm a vampire slayer. I'm going to go find Edward. I'm going to put him down because, he should not be doing this to young ladies, right? Young ladies out there who are within the sound of my voice. If a man does this to you, if a boy does this to you, it's a huge red flag. He's a bad person. He's dangerous to be around if he's shoving you around and jamming you into his car and like not letting you out of his sight and isolating you from your friends and family and taking you out into the woods and threatening to kill you, right? This is a bad dude. It's bad. And the fact that Stephenie Meyer plays it off as romantic is almost unforgivable given the context of the fact that she had such a wide teenage audience that she came to, teenage girls who then learned that this is normal behavior for a man to engage in. And it's not acceptable. Here's some facts, right? Let's go to the meadow scene, right? The meadow scene, they're romping around. Bella sees that Edward's sparkly. It's super cool to her. She smells his breath. It's super cool to her. She's really into it. And he's like, oh, as if I needed the alluring breath to lure you in. And then he gets up and he does like a lap around the clearing. He's like super fast, I guess. And he's like, as if you could outrun me. And then he like snaps a branch and he's like, as if you could fight me off. Right. And then he's just like tossing her around, being a jerk to her, scaring her actively. She knows she's out in the woods with an apex predator, and he's just flexing and flaunting his violent tendencies and capabilities in her face. It's not cool. First of all, right, all men could be dangerous monsters if we didn't control ourselves. This is not the case for all couples, but as a general rule, the man in the couple is going to be bigger and stronger and faster and could hurt or kill the woman without too much trouble. And that sucks. The women are in a super vulnerable position when you think about it, to be able to trust a man who is, I am twice my wife's size. right? And she trusts me with all of these fragile, vulnerable little baby girls in my house to not be a monster. And, I am worthy of that trust because I'm not a monster, right? But all men, if they were deciding to lean into being a monster, could be monsters if we didn't control ourselves, right? And Edward, because he's extra strong and extra fast and has extra violent tendencies or whatever, he uses that as an excuse to kind of flaunt that in Bella's face. And that's just not cool to me. I found the whole interaction there super, super uncool the whole time. And he's such a creep too, right? Like, in the first part of the book, he's like, "Oh, girl, come here, girl. Let me talk to you, girl." And she's like, glamorized by him and his beauty or whatever. And so she walks up to him and he's like, "I'm so dangerous. I'm so bad. Don't you know how bad I am?" And then he still stalks her and hunts her and manipulates her and abuses her. He's abusive. He's an abusive person. And here's the other thing. So Bella's in a position now where she can either lean into this relationship and accept his overbearing and violent tendencies, or else what, right? Can she leave? Will he hunt her down if she spurns him? What in her position, what are her options? Can she be like, actually, Edward, I'm not feeling this. You're actually kind of scaring me a lot. And he's like, "Well, I mean, now that I'm a vampire, I obviously can't let you go. And so maybe I just lure you out into the woods one last time, one last hurrah, finally give in and drink that sweet, sweet blood that I've been after." Right. And that's kind of the main beef that I have, right? He is a much, much older man. He has 100 years more experience than she does. He's been around lots of places, lots of times. He's an old person and he knows what he's doing. He's aware of how he's intimidating and seducing her, and he uses that to isolate her from her friends and her family. He grooms her. He persuades her that, they were meant to be together. It's basically pedo stuff 101, right? Mad pedo vibes from Edward. And Stephenie Meyer, shame on you for writing this, right? That for me, the fact that it's bad writing, whatever, right? I can get over that. I've read, semi-pro literature before, and it's fine, right? Like I'm not like a snob about what I read. This is where this book really falls down for me and becomes a problem, is that you glamorize the grooming and exploitation of teenage girls by much, much, much older, much, much, much more powerful men. And that's a problem. And you normalize it, and you even try to make it beautiful, and you sell it to an audience of teenage girls. And I can't even comprehend the damage that's been done in the world to girls who then went on and thought that abusive behavior was normal and even romantic. It's a problem. So let's head over to the rating of the Bells real quick. That's right. This is a 1-star, 1 bell book. And how could I give it any more than that? I get that this was a big book. I get that it sold millions and millions of copies. I get that even some of the people who I love and deeply respect love this book. But I can't in good conscience elevate this book and recommend this book to people who could be harmed by it. And I'm not going to be harmed by it, right? In fact, I was mostly just grossed out by it. And if you're an adult, then you read it and you're like, okay, this is kind of a cringy love story, but maybe you're into that sort of thing, right? But if you're a teenage girl and you're trying to navigate the world, and teenage boys being what they are, they're not great. I'll be honest. I was a teenage boy. I was not great. I knew lots of teenage boys. They were not great. There are boys out there who are so angry and so fueled by rage and hormones and all this stuff during that time in their life that they become possessive, they become abusive, they become controlling, and they will try to isolate and isolate young ladies from their friends and their families and split them off and take them for themselves. And that's a real thing that really does happen. All of Edward's behaviors in this book are huge red flags. And if you're a young lady trying to figure out your life, try to figure out how to navigate, the perils of middle school and high school, which, there shouldn't even be a middle school, right? Let's have all children between the ages of whatever that is. So what is that? 10 and 13 or so. Let's have all children in that first early onset of puberty just go home. Just call it a day, go home for a few years, come back once you're on the other side of puberty and continue your education then, because middle school's, no one looks back fondly on middle school. I've never met a soul who does. But anyways, if you're a young lady, you're trying to navigate that environment and you've got an abusive boy who's, vying for your attention and affection, and he's doing so with, heavy-handedness and threats of, overpowering you, or he does overpower you and physically push you around, you've got to know that that's not romantic. And that's not, oh, he's my cute vampire boyfriend. He's just like Edward, right? No, it's a huge red flag. You're going to get yourself in trouble. You're going to get yourself hurt. It's not okay. For my 4 daughters, I don't want them to read this book and feel like what Edward does is all right. That's not what a man is. Men don't do that. And that's what I wanted to spend today's parting thought on, because I was thinking about this. I'm like, okay, so what can I do to counteract all of the of Edward's cringe, right? He's a 117-year-old man who's like, I'm sorry, Bella. I just have a huge temper. I have a hard time controlling my temper. Well, get it under control, bud. Just like the rest of us, get it under control. You don't get to throw people around, especially women. All right. Maybe I'm taking this too seriously, and I probably am. Right. It would have maybe been more fun for me to just like mock Twilight, and maybe I should have done that. But as I finished this book off, I was like, oh man, the platform that I have, this shout into the abyss, wherever you are, dear listener. If any part of you thinks that any part of Edward and Bella's relationship is okay, I have to tell you, you got to reevaluate your view on manhood. And what better way to do that than from Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic philosopher and emperor of Rome. Marcus Aurelius had 13 children. Did you know that? This is a man who understood fatherhood. A lot of his meditations are written about his children and spending time with them, because that time, he says, when you tuck them in bed at night, this might, treat this like it's the last time you'll ever do it, because it might be, right? He loved his children. He loved his wife. So here's a quote from Marcus Aurelius. Quote, "Keep this thought handy when you feel a fit of rage coming on. It isn't manly to be enraged. Rather, gentleness and civility are more human and therefore manlier. A real man doesn't give way to anger and discontent, and such a person has strength, courage, and endurance. Unlike the angry and complaining, the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." End quote. You got to control those passions. Edward has problems. Edward is actually the bad guy of this story. Hot take, Edward is kind of the bad guy. He grooms and isolates and controls a teenage girl, lures her off, and eventually she becomes a blood-sucking monster because of him, right? That's the actual Twilight story in a nutshell. And yeah, maybe it was hot and beautiful to, a lot of teenage girls at the time, but I think this might have actually done some damage to society. And when books portray a message that's bad, they don't deserve all of the fame and accolades that go along with them. I get that it was cool and interesting, and there was a lot to like about it, if you're into that sort of thing. But we got to pump the brakes from time to time and be like, is this really what we want young ladies to be learning about romance? And I think not. And, be careful out there, guys. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Be good. Control your temper, control your passions, and treat each other with respect, right? There's no need for violence and manipulation and all this stuff that passes for love in the Twilight universe. In the real world, mutual respect, equality, not flaunting your physical ability to dominate the other person. All this stuff is much more conducive to a happy, healthy relationship that with, among equals who don't become monsters in the end. You can live happily ever after. But Twilight, that's not the model for that. So I've said enough. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'm going to wrap it up. This podcast has grown. I would like for it to continue to grow. So if you know of someone who's interested or might be interested in a new podcast, if you could recommend that, I'd really, really appreciate it. I'm not going to do the Amazon affiliate links anymore. Turns out a number of you had bought books and Amazon was not, did not honor their end of the bargain. I have received no pennies from Amazon. So I'm not going to, harass you guys to go over and buy books. That's not going to be a thing. My wife suggested that I set up a Patreon for this. So I went ahead and did that, but that feels kind of as well. So if you're interested in, giving a couple of bucks to the podcast to help me, keep doing it, keep buying books. I am a poor, starving grad student. I've been, a student for a lot of years now. Money is tight. So, if you would like to support the podcast and help me to, buy more books so I can keep doing this show, then you can find me on Patreon. It's What's Tom Reading. That's on Patreon somewhere. I'm not exactly sure how Patreon works, but yeah, if you'd like to do that, I'd really appreciate it. Don't feel like you have to, though. I am mostly grateful that you're out there and you're listening to the podcast. Thank you guys so much. Please have a good day. You deserve it. Goodbye.